You're listening to the Tank Magazine podcast, and in this episode, Tamsin Blanchard visits Phoebe English in her Deptford studio. Phoebe English is a British fashion designer who founded her eponymous line in 2011 after graduating from Central St Martin's. She has become synonymous with highly crafted, diaphanous and dark designs in both her men's and women's wear. The full text version of this interview is featured in the Tank travel issue.
This place has a lot of atmosphere where you're working.
Do you think?
Yeah.
Oh, that's nice. I'm very fond of it.
We're right next to Deptford Creek.
Yes, literally next to it, right next. We're in the flood warning area
Oh,
of the
really?
creek. Yes. No, it hasn't flooded yet, but that's how close we are.
And we're in a quite old building. And can you describe this room that we're in?
We are in the board meeting room, which was used, I guess, for board meetings for the management team of the building. The building's, I think, original 1920s. So we have some very beautiful 1920s windows, and then the room is entirely wood panelled, so it's quite dark. And then with beautiful wooden parquet flooring as well. So it's quite sort of formal looking, but it hasn't really been restored. So it's got a nice shabbiness to it as well. It's just really nice to have a room that is my thinking room and my looking room. But yeah, losing yourself is very important for good ideas. So that's why it was really important when I moved studios that there was somewhere where I could just come and stare into space.
Well, obviously you need the business to actually fully function and operate in this industry.
Yeah.
But at the same time, it seems to me that your artiness is what has become your USP and has been, it's something that's really informed all of your presentations. They always seem to have been from a kind of art background, more so even maybe than a fashion design background.
Yeah, maybe. I mean, both of my parents are artists, and pretty much everyone in my family. So I didn't really know about many other things other than that. But I knew quite early on that I didn't want to study fine art. Father is a conceptual land artist. My mother is an abstract painter, but she's also a poet and a musician and a performer. She was sort of in some of the first pioneering feminist theatre groups in the early, sort of 70s, 80s. Sort of avant-garde feminist theatre troupes.
Do you remember going to any of those as a child?
No, I think she had stopped doing them when she had me and my sister, but by then she was working as an art teacher and as a painter. So yeah, my sister and I grew up in an extremely artistic environment.
So why did you choose fashion school?
I flipped a coin because I couldn't choose between being an actor or being a fashion designer, and it fell on the acting side. So I spent the whole summer applying to about 35 drama schools and didn't get into any of them. So yeah, when I got to St Martin's, everyone was putting together these really slick research books and fashion illustrations, and I didn't know what I was doing at all. So it took me a couple of years to kind of find my feet there. And then I sort of did my BA and started on the MA, and then I think that's when Louise kind of saw the slight glimmer towards concept and towards art, and I think she kind of really brought that out in me, and we kind of dispelled all the decoration. But yeah, so my work changed quite dramatically my aesthetic changed quite dramatically when I was on the MA.
For the spring summer 17 collection, it seemed as though there were much more recognisable pieces of clothing in that collection. But at the same time, it's interesting that you were saying that you were toying with the idea of becoming an actor at one point. It was about characters and characters doing actions.
Yeah. I hadn't thought about that. You're absolutely right. It's actually the closest acty thing I've done for a very long time. Yeah, it was very theatre based. I was very worried about that actually. They got to a point where I was like, where we were a bit too late to turn around, and I suddenly was like, oh, is this going to look like a fancy dress show? Christ. So I was really worried. I think when you try and when you do something different, it's a risk, and you just can't predict how people are going to read into it, or whether they're going to get it, or whether they're just going to laugh at it, or they're going to hate it. It's scary, but I really had a lot of conviction that this was how I was going to do it, and it was just a completely different format. It was a completely different framework to build the collection on.
It's like a collection that had a lot of emotion and seemed to be a gut reaction.
Yeah, both of those things, definitely. I was really angry when I designed it, and like absolutely, completely devastated. I was upset and shocked and disappointed with the referendum result. But then I was even more upset and disappointed and worried and frightened by the treatment of some of my friends post-referendum result. The weird thing that happened in this country after that all was announced. I just felt like I was just watching somewhere that I'd known, the only place I've really known my whole life, just completely change in front of my eyes. It was really frightening. I mean, it's kind of simmered down a little bit now, but I mean, the thought of being from somewhere where it was just normal for it to suddenly be okay to be racist or xenophobic or rude and homophobic towards people overnight was really disturbing. I found it really disturbing and worrying, and to see how group mentalities and mob mentalities can affect a whole, almost like everywhere in the country overnight, was quite alarming. And yeah, it was a kind of weird time. So it was really hard to not respond to feelings like that of kind of confusion and shock and disgust and terror, and I was feeling quite a lot of things very strongly.
So that was channeled into this collection?
Yeah.
Was that because did you feel as though you needed somewhere to express that?
No, because we, as a studio, we went to all of the protests. I spoke in Parliament Square on the stage, and I mean, I'm the only English person that I work with, and the thought that could be threatened was really horrible.
Where else are your team from?
Switzerland, Ukraine, Sweden, Spain, Italy, France. I mean, everywhere. There's students that come to work with us from all over the world, and which is a privilege. That is a privilege that people want to come here. And yeah, I really vehemently believe it's a privilege to be in a city and a country. When you walk down the street in London, you're walking past people from every corner of the whole world. I think that's incredible and something that should be really celebrated, and I find it very confusing when people can't see that that's such a huge part of why London is amazing. But I mean, I guess in England as a greater whole, people obviously don't feel the same in the majority. And there's just no excuse for knocking on someone's door and telling them to get out of the country. That's just not okay. And yelling at someone and calling them a racist name on the tube in central London, or, yelling at someone for being gay in a petrol station. All of these things happen to people I know within 3 or 4 days.
Do you feel as though this is the country that you're going to stay in?
Quite a lot of people in my close circle of friends have already left. and more of them have already applied for their parents' nationality, so like American passports or Swedish passports, in order to be able to have other options and to go in the future. I never thought I'd ever, I mean, it wasn't even a thought to ever think that I might not want to be here. But I mean, I went through a long time of being really ashamed of my surname and not really believing in what it stood for anymore.
And you are very rooted. You seem to me a very English rooted designer.
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't want to leave. But there's some really weird things happening in this country. Yeah, I mean, who knows what's going to happen in the future? I don't have anywhere to go. This is where I'm from, and that's where my family are and all my friends. I don't have any other citizenship options, unlike most of the people that I know who can just go whenever they want. So yeah, I guess I'm stuck here.
So tell me how that manifested itself, where you had 7 different characters.
Yeah, it's very hard to run a small business. And the shock of suddenly realising I was going to have to run this thing that is already really hard in an even harder and more complicated climate was very upsetting. So I wrote these 4 characters, which were kind of metaphors for different feelings after the referendum result was announced. There's the archer, the water bearer, the inquirer, the smuggler, the chanter, the strangler, and the mourner. So yeah, each one had a different action. They were quite literal. The archer was literally an archer with a bow and arrow and apples to kind of do her archer training on. But the reason she came about was not literal. So she was a metaphor for shock. And then the water bearer, who was, she had lots of water and she was sort of playing with the water vessels, and she was a metaphor for tears, for crying. The inquirer was a symbol of a sort of representation of that weird announcement that was made that the top Googled question the day after the referendum result was, what is the EU? So the inquirer was a representation of that. The smuggler she was a metaphor for lying, and the lies that the Leave campaign quite clearly, were using. The chanter was a representation of the protests that we all went to, so sort of protesting. The strangler sounds really horrible, her name isn't that nice, but the strangler is the anxiety that I felt waiting to hear, because there was that sort of long time where everyone was like, oh, they might not trigger Article 50 and it'll be fine. So just waiting and no one knowing anything, no one making any announcements for weeks. So that was that kind of strangling anxiety that you feel in your stomach when you we just didn't know what was going to happen. And then the mourner is the loss, so the fact that we are leaving. And I think that at the beginning, when I first wrote them, that they were a lot more angry than they were in the actual final presentation, which was obviously quite a few weeks later.
And how did it inform the actual clothes that each of those characters were wearing and then shape the collection?
It was a lot easier because we were building a look or a kind of a costume or, some garments for each specific character. So I was building the look for each one. So it was really kind of approaching a very different way. And then I was quite worried it was too fashion and or it was a bit too fancy dress, and I was quite worried about it. But actually, when you unpick the collection and you see it kind of all together,
it seemed to have quite a lot of clarity, I think, in the silhouettes.
I think that might be because I was feeling very intentional about everything. So I think I did try and make it slightly clearer this season anyway, but I think now that the menswear has got momentum and is successful and is helping us, I don't feel like I have to do that with the women's wear, which is a really nice feeling to be able to know that I can feel happy with having some freedom with it and just to enjoy it and sort of use it as a kind of a vehicle of expression. Because I think work is always looks better if it comes from a place of conviction. So it's nice to feel like I can really have that with the women's wear.
To hear more podcasts from Tank Magazine, be sure to subscribe through the iTunes Store. The theme music for this podcast is taken from Waiting Games by Kate Simcoe and the London Electronic Orchestra.